Welcome to the Don't Sink podcast, everybody. Today I have a special guest. His name is Colonel Damon Wells. He's a seasoned Army officer, and he has many different lessons to teach us about leadership and also how he applies what he's learned in the military to everyday life. Um, First, I'd like to ask you, where'd you grow up and what influenced you to first go into the military?
So I grew up I'm from Texas. So I grew up in a small town south of Houston that is called South Houston. It's about three
Nice.
square miles, kind of on the outskirts of big city of Houston.
Yep.
I honestly didn't have any influences growing up that were, military oriented at all.
Right.
It wasn't until about high school I kind of started thinking about it, but I played in rock bands and didn't really see it as something I would actually do. It was just something that kind of interested me.
Right.
And I think when the Gulf War started, it just kind of I can't really explain it. It just kind of felt like that's something I should be doing. I feel compelled to do that. I didn't join then. I joined a little later, but that was probably the spark of actually, man, that feels significant. It feels like something I need to be a part of, and that's probably
Yeah.
where it started. And then 5 years later is when I enlisted.
Yeah. I think the military in general has gained a kind of um, indifferent connotation over the last decade or so. And I believe that one, what you do is very honorable and respectable, and I think it it shows a high level of not only patriotism but just an inner strength to be able to say, I'm going to do something bigger than myself, and I'm going to participate in something and literally put my life on the line to protect my home. And I think that's a very noble and um, it's a very humbling thing that I think a lot of people should pay more attention to the kind of mindset behind an individual that is willing to risk their life for the greater of humanity.
Yeah, some great points. And that's kind of intrinsically that's kind of how I felt. I really couldn't put it into words. It's hard to articulate it and put it in those words. This is why I want to join the army. It just felt really compelling. And then the longer I stay in, because at first it's new and it's kind of scary, and you're trying to figure everything out and understand your place in the military. Um,
Yeah,
but after a while, you start to kind of come to grips with. Let me turn my camera on. Sorry about that.
they're all
After
good.
you're on for a while, you come to grips with um, why you're doing this and why it matters and why the nation needs you to do things like that.
Yeah, it's super important to not only tell your story, but to show that it's something that can turn into something much more as you've done. Things you've learned from the military definitely transfer over to other aspects and avenues in life. And I think um, those lessons are something people should be educated on and hear stories like your story on the things that you've learned. So, what are some core things that you took away from the military and that you apply to your everyday life and your other avenues?
Yeah. So the biggest one, the one I like to talk about the most, is leadership. Just general
Hmm.
leadership, and then getting into specific leadership, because every situation there's optimal leaders for different situations. There's optimal leaders for different teams, different industries. So that's a big one I like to talk about. I like to talk about teams and team building, the value of a good team, and by that I mean a team that works well together, a team that's very cohesive. Those are my most memorable experiences, or as I search back through the memory banks, which teams did I really like being on? It never really came down to what was the team doing or what mission they had or what equipment or what unit. It was never about that. It was always, man, I really like that unit because the people in
Yeah,
there I really got along with. I do anything for those guys. They do anything for me. So that's another one. How important a good team is. A cohesive team will always find a way to win.
yeah,
There's things just personally, like discipline wise, setting your sights on a goal and just not accepting excuses, even when they're really good excuses from yourself. If you want that
Yeah.
goal, you have to just go. And frankly, nobody cares. You're the only one that's going to be able to push you to that goal or push you through the things that would derail you in a lot of circumstances. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is, can you do this or not? And if you can, you got to just push through. So it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Instilling that drive and that discipline to, if you want something, you have to get after it. And your mind naturally is going to come up with excuses and barriers to entry. And you have to rise above all that if you want something to be done. And I think that combined with working in a team collaboratively and all having uh, a same goal and all
Yeah,
giving your all towards it is super important and can be applied to anything you want to do in life. I think growing up in America, we have kind of like a DIY mindset. We can do it
yeah,
ourselves. We can, get our boots on and just do it ourselves. We don't need much help. We just gotta get it done ourselves. And I think having the self confidence to pursue a goal relentlessly, no matter what the excuses you have, in combination with being able to work in a team is super important.
yeah. And I'll tell you, like some of the harder things was like whether it be like a hard school or deploying to combat or whatever. The easy fallback to sort of push you forward, and the Army's sort of a closed system. But the easiest way is like, look, man, there's tons of people that have done this before. They're no more special than I am. If they can do it, I can do it. That's usually the fallback. If nothing else is catching me, it's like, man, they can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
It's a simple thing, but
Yeah, it's simple, but a lot of people have struggles with, comparison and looking at other guys and say, there's no way I can do that. I don't have the talents, I don't have the genetics, I don't have A, B, or Z or C, but we're all human and we all, I believe, have innate gifts, but we also, the thing that keeps us all cohesive and all together is we all have the ability to work hard at something.
that's
We
it.
all have the ability to, just get after it and not um, let those, not let genetics or not let, the conditions you grew up in affect your determination.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many stories about people who are, top 0.1% of their game. And, they'll tell you it's, genetics and all that. That's good. But at the end of the day, if you're not willing to put in the work and you're not willing
Yeah.
to get rid of the distractions and work hard and be uncomfortable, you'll never make it. That's just a fact.
So when you went to school and you were studying, I know that you have degrees in psychology and kinesiology. What are some takeaways that you learned on that journey?
Um, so that's an interesting one because the school, when you're in the military and you go to a school, it's kind of a hiatus from the military. You're still in the military, but you're just going to school.
Yeah.
So you get a chance to almost be a civilian, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Like you're not
Right.
going to work in the military; you just go to college, right?
Yeah.
So I've done that twice. I did it for my bachelor's in psychology, and I did it for my master's in kinesiology. Um, and so those are the times where you learn to appreciate the team because in college it's kind of just you and maybe some friends, but it's where you learn to appreciate what you have in the military. And now, honestly, it's a good chance to sort of recharge your batteries and do
Yeah.
some introspection and remember what you love about the military. I'll tell you, those two, like psychology and kinesiology, still remain some things I'm just very fascinated by. I still look to psychology as sort of the backbone of the way I approach leadership.
Hmm.
Kinesiology, I've done personal training. Of course, I work out. I love working out. I love lifting weights and doing that. So that tied right back in, and that was the kinesiology degree was a precursor or requirement so that I could go teach at West Point, teach boxing and
Hmm.
combatives, hand to hand fighting, and I don't know, it was really good. So I think what I learned from the master's degree was how to understand the research process and look for, look through the actual data for constructs or things I'm interested in, and understand what is the science actually say about this thing, and not just for
Yeah.
kinesiology, but I really use it now for leadership. My second master's was at the Army War College, and I did a ton of research on just leadership in general. So those are a couple things. Like I said, I think the big one is, man, it's a good break if you're in the Army and you're
Yeah.
lucky enough to go to a degree completion program. Hey, this is a great break. But at the end of the day, it's you do miss the military, and it's always refreshing to kind of get back into it.
How important is um, psychology for somebody, understanding psychology in terms of being a good leader?
It's very important. Not It's important. Let me phrase it this way: it's important for you to understand yourself,
Right.
and that's psychology. Psychology is a very broad brush, so I'll just narrow it down. So
Yeah.
you need to understand yourself. You need to be self-aware, and really, what you need to know is your personality. So there's lots of ways to measure personality. Myers Briggs, Big Five. There's lots of ways to do that. I would say that's very important for leaders because you will have preferences for how you lead, and you
Mhm.
won't really understand those. They'll just be natural
Right.
until you understand why do I prefer to do it this way and not that way. For you can think of a great leader in the healthcare system will have different attributes than a military leader. Both good, both
Right.
really good in their craft, but you will have certain a niche where this leadership style is better. So it's important to from a psychological perspective for leaders to understand that about themselves. One example, I'm fairly low in conscientiousness from the Big Five, which doesn't really match up to military service, but I've made it work because I'm pretty high in openness. So I'm more interested in finding a creative solution than I am
Right.
just following the book solution. And it's got me this far. Um, yeah, but
Right.
that's super important.
Being a leader, do you believe that leaders are born or created?
Mostly created.
Mhm.
Because it's a personality thing. There's a lot of things you may just naturally have leadership qualities based on your
Mhm.
personality style. But at some point, you're going to have to do some studying, and you're going to have to get mentored to get better. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people, frankly, going back to the Big Five personality assessment. It's people who are extroverted and a little
Yeah.
bit charismatic will just tend to have natural leadership qualities.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they know anything about how to get a team to do the things they need to do, whether it's good or bad, all the time. So you may be born with a leg up, but you're going to have to do some work to be the optimal leader that your team needs.
You mentioned that you have more of a creative approach to leadership, and you've found a way to make that successful in your leadership in the military. How important is it to be flexible in the different formats of leadership?
So it's important. I would say the higher you go, and I've been in 28 years, so the longer you're in, the higher leadership position you hold, the more important it is to understand how to be flexible and how to look at a problem and not just automatically go to the direct solution, the direct route to the solution. As when you're younger, it's okay to kind of take the direct route to the solution. I'm not saying it's if you're creative, don't be creative. But
Right.
at the end of the day, that's where you're learning how to do the stuff, the processes by the numbers, and that's fine.
Hmm.
And the problems are smaller when you're at a lower echelon. The problems are smaller, and the higher you go, the bigger and more complex the problems get. So you always need to approach them from an open-minded perspective, but really from a creative and what's the optimal solution that nobody's thinking about right now. That to me, that's a big deal. And that's a mark of a really good leader that can take those creative optimal solutions and get the team to rally behind that and do that.
Yeah, I believe that the a unit is only as strong as its weakest point, and um, being a leader, how do you go about making sure that everybody is on the same page and working towards a goal at the same intensity?
Yeah, so that kind of goes back to my I have a leadership framework. It's kind of a team building slash leadership framework.
Mm,
And the first thing on there is people. So you have to understand the people that you're working with. And through that, what you do is you build trust. And so trust
mm,
is the biggest component out of there. So that's sort of one approach. When I would counsel some of my junior officers, the men and women that would work for me, um, one of my key takeaways, especially if they're new to the unit, these are leaders, so they have folks that work for them. So one of my directives to them, it's kind of a list of like 10 things I want to make sure they're doing, but they need to understand that everybody on their team adds value in one way or the other. And the discussion, what I usually sort of parse out in that discussion is that we always want to get stuff done, and we want to be we want the system optimized. We want to perform well. So what we typically do is when we're there, we've got our team of 15 people. We will start to notice trends on who's very reliable, who's very good at getting the stuff done, who can I trust
yeah.
without giving them any more data, just fix this problem and it gets fixed. Down to the other side of the spectrum, the folks that don't want to do anything, maybe, or we'll just say that they don't have the experience.
Mm,
Everybody's got to add value, so you have to be cognizant of the fact that am I overworking the very reliable people, which will
mm,
have the negative effect of they'll notice at some point that they're overworking, and they'll get a little bit bitter about that naturally, right?
yeah.
Also, on the other end of the spectrum, if you're hesitant to give your projects to other people because they're not as reliable, then they will also get sort of a negative perspective of the team that they don't add value, and that can really be on both ends.
Yeah.
So you have to be real careful about how you manage who gets what, and that really starts with understanding your people, understanding the dynamics of the team, and then if we're gonna watch who we give the projects to, you just got to know, hey, this project is if we fail this project, it's catastrophic for the team. So got to give, maybe I'll pull one of my bottom 10% to work with the top 10%. But just making sure that everybody gets some kind of equitable level of work in there. That's tricky.
Yeah, that could be complicated, but it takes patience and awareness as well.
Yeah.
Um, when you were active in like look coming up through the ranks, who are some great leaders that you had and people that you kind of got a model on the correct way to go about being a leader?
So there's a few. When my first experience in the Army, and this is a bit of a story, but there's a reason I'm telling this story. So when I first got to my very first unit in 1995 in
Mm,
Colorado, the unit was in the middle of a move. They were moving from one installation in Texas up to the installation in Colorado. So there wasn't a bunch going on. They didn't have their equipment there yet. There wasn't a lot of people. And I'm brand new, so I don't know anything about the Army. I'm glad to be
right.
there, but I just don't know anything, right?
Yeah.
So I had a young leader, a sergeant, who wasn't very proactive, didn't really, want to do anything productive. So we just kind of moved furniture around and mowed grass and did whatever. And again, I'm new, so that fine. That if this is the
Right.
Army, then fine. I'd love it so far. So anyway, we had a meeting, and he said, "Hey, there's a Soldier of the Month board coming up. Wells, you're pretty smart. You should go to this board." Yeah,
Hmm.
sure, no problem. So a month goes by. I didn't hear anything about it. Didn't know that there's more to it than just going to the board. But the day before the board comes, and say, "Hey, your board's tomorrow. Make sure you have your dress uniform and yada yada." So no problem. Came in, go to the board. They teach me how to report. They start asking questions. I don't know any of the questions because I didn't study because I didn't know what it was. Just so
Right.
happened the new boss had just got there, Sergeant First Class, and he was good. And he's like, he pulled me out of there, said, "You don't know any of the questions," and gave me a stern talking to, and didn't want to hear why I didn't know any of the answers to the questions.
Right.
But that man, Sergeant First Class Mahoney, Paul Mahoney, ended up being one of the most powerful influences on the rest of my career. He's the one that made me take the path that I'm on now. He just saw the potential in me. And had he not pushed me, it was a lot of work. I probably would have just taken the easy path and not done it. But he pushed me. And so in my mind, that's what I want. Like I'm too high right now to see the potential. And so you gotta push people and make them uncomfortable to fulfill what their potential is. And so
Yeah.
that was the first one. I had, later on, I had a guy who was very personable. Didn't like I was used to having leaders that would sort of have an emotional or a stress reaction when they got bad news and things like that. So you're always
Right.
you're a little nervous about telling them if there's bad news, and that had been my
Right.
experience for the first 12, 15 years, and that it seemed normal. I mean, I get it, but he never did that, and it was always well, that's a problem. Yeah, let's solve the problem, and that sort of like, wow, I didn't know you could do. I didn't
Yeah.
know that was allowed.
Right.
So I definitely captured that and used that for the rest of my career, and to the point that people had said, something they noticed about me. Bad news
Right.
never seemed to upset you. And I was like, yeah, but it makes a big deal because people are very willing to tell you the truth if you just accept the truth and say, okay, now we got a problem. Let's fix the problem. So I think
Yeah.
it was a big deal. Um, there's plenty of others all the way from, and you'd be surprised when we go to I've been to a lot of schools and militaries. You're in schools every couple of years. So, history professors and, retired military personnel that teach us how to do operations and planning. Just interesting folks that made a huge impact. Some of my peers, you get a lot of influence from peers, just saying, I really like the way that guy just engaged his team.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to do that now.
Yeah. Having that stoic example of just, not getting too high, not getting too low when a problem presents itself is kind of the essence of, uh, to me, what military operators are here for. I mean, they are problem solvers. That is their job. Professional problem solvers at that. So setting that example of just, not getting too reactive when a problem presents itself, like you said, opens up the opportunity for more honesty and more transparentness when it comes to people coming forward and explaining the things that they need and things that need to be changed, and new solutions also would present itself, because people just feel naturally more comfortable with opening up that dialogue. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I could tell you from experience, having the opposite boss. Like I've had some that they get very emotional about
Yeah.
bad news or failure, and it just stifles the team, and they never want to. One of the stories was the boss. I wasn't there, but the boss said, "Hey, we need to do this," and everybody said, "Yeah, sure." And then something, it was a failure somehow, and they all knew it was going to fail, but they were so scared to tell them
Mm.
that they just did it anyway, which makes no sense.
Yeah, it's very counterintuitive. When you were instructing at West Point, and you were mentoring, what are some key things you looked for in individuals? Like you said earlier in your career, you had somebody that pushed you and saw potential in you. What are some things that you look for in an individual where you're like, okay, I can push this person to the next level. They're they have a higher potential than what they're operating at.
Yeah, so at West Point, so you got to conceptualize at West Point. They're basically college kids that put on a military uniform every now and then.
Right.
Now, make no mistake, West Point is a very rigorous. The schedules are long, and the subject matter is top tier. The instructors are very good. So these are college kids. So what really just kind of the basics of personality characteristics. They're already smart. They got to West Point because they're smart. They're disciplined to some extent that you just won't survive. I don't know that I could have made it through West Point when I was that age. I went through the officer candidate school, but going
Mm.
there as an instructor, looking at it, I'm like, man, I don't know if I could have done this. This is hard. But
Yeah.
What I really tried to do was, as a, sort of mid-grade officer when I was instructing, just let them know how to communicate with folks like me, and show them that, you know, I'm not a scary guy. That we can have normal conversations. Try to
Mhm.
make them understand how the things they're learning there, whether it be, hand-to-hand combat or boxing, the fun stuff that I got to teach, or
Yeah.
physics or history or whatever. Um, Not necessarily output of what you are learning, but the ability to learn, the ability to understand problems, to apply yourself to problems, to apply yourself to that uncomfortable, that thing that's really hard that you've got to get through to get to the next phase. That really just the basics on just how to see yourself where you're at now, and then how to translate what you're learning here into the military was probably the biggest one, because they just don't know. They're fun to work with
Yeah.
because they're very curious about. They know a little bit about the military, but they're not
Yeah.
technically in the military yet. So just
Right.
every now and then, kind of, if I'm working with the powerlifting team, say, you guys work really hard. You're always pushing for more. If you take that same attitude and apply it to your team with some rigor and with a little bit of logic and reason, not being crazy about it,
Yeah.
that'll get you a long way. You just got to take that same attitude and apply it to teamwork.
Yeah. It's a very universal skill, a universal mindset. Um, how have you transferred those skills into a more corporate setting and educated other people on how they can, use that military-esque mindset of discipline, determination, and overcoming problems? How can that be transferred into like the corporate setting?
So I've built this model of kind of this framework of how I see leadership, really in the context of how do you apply leadership to team building. And the great thing about the military is, I mentioned school. So you go to school every 2 or 3 years generally. Um,
Hmm.
and for officers, you do staff positions where you work under a commander on the staff, and you also do command positions, which command authority is a big deal, and it's a big deal to be selected for command. So I've done that a few times. It was my last job before I came here to Germany. So because you have that relatively stable repeating pattern over the years, you get chances, like in school, you get chances to learn. It's you learn a bunch of stuff, but at the end of the day, it gives you time to consolidate those thoughts about your last duty assignment. What
Right.
did I do well? What did I do? And then, there's certain parts of the class where you'll think about what's your leadership vision, and, you know, strategy and that kind of stuff, and how do you want to be as a leader. So those were always very interesting to me. Those are the things I put a little extra work into. And then you get to take that, and then you get to apply it over and over. You get to
Right.
practice it. So that's to me the benefit of the military is you're changing jobs every 1 to 2 years. You're frequently going to schools to sort of, you know uh, re sort of replot where your leadership style is, and eventually,
Hmm.
and after 28 years, I've kind of got it pegged down. And I've applied this in my last two commands, and it seems to work well. But what I do is there's a model. It's P4 model. It's four
Hmm.
P's: people, partnerships, practice, and purpose. So it's kind of cyclical in that you start here and go this way, but it's also continuous in that, for the military, you get a team, but the team is not always stacked. The team will always be losing
Right.
someone. Someone's coming in, including you. Like at some point you're the new guy, and at some point you're leaving.
Yeah.
So people is the first one, and the first thing I want to do is, or the first thing I want to focus on is building trust. So understanding that this group will only function optimally if I can establish some baseline of trust. And you have to understand the team and know where that baseline is. And
Right.
there's always some people that you're just never going to get. But as long as you have, some percentage that you've got this baseline of trust, you can go on to the next step.
Hmm.
Also, one of the primary things you're doing is looking at things like the climate of the unit. Okay, first thing, people, right? I want to understand the people. How are we going to treat each other in this team? And it starts with how you treat other people on the team. So you want
Yeah.
to set that example, and you want to enforce that this this team needs to work well together. So it's important that people, treat each other well and have positive relationships. So the climate is a
Right.
big deal. So that gets you to trust. The next thing is partnerships. This is basically focusing on the team. So trust
Mm-hmm.
is individual relationships, and when we get to partnerships, we're talking about the team as an aggregate. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing we want to focus on here is cohesion. I want that team really bonded together. This is where you start to build things like unit identity. So they'll have a
Okay.
nickname like the snakes or the alligators or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But what you want is for them to identify with that, and you want their self identity to sort of take on that unit identity as much as possible, so that they feel like they're part of the team and they feel like that guy or gal over there is part of my team. So I have this bond with them,
Right.
and that's sort of a stepping stone to get you to the next phase. And in here, one of the things I've noticed that builds cohesion the fastest in the military is shared hardship. Like the more
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable situations you're in with people, the more, and it's just a psychological, uh, facet of the human personalities, right? It's just
Right.
that's a natural thing to do. So shared hardship, whether it's induced by you, whether it's hard, we're going to go do some physical training, do a hard run together or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
or it's in the rigors of combat. Sometimes it's just a matter of the number of hours you spend together. When you're on a combat deployment, like you literally spend 24 hours a day with the same people. And eventually
Yeah.
you run out of things, like you run out of work things to talk about. So you end up talking about your dog and your wife and your grandma. And, you end up you
Right.
share a lot of information, which increases the cohesion of that team. Cause you just, that's just a natural thing. So the next P is
Mm-hmm.
practice. So practice is really the work of what you do. It's either, in the Army, we do a lot of training to get better at our combat mission, or it's actually executing our combat mission. So we want to be good at what we do. We want to be experts. We want to be optimal at what we do. In this phase, so you've come from focusing on your partnerships, your teams, and you've transitioned to being good at the things you do, because now you have a team full of people who trust each other and that are cohesive.
Yeah.
Cohesive teams always perform better. You know that.
Right.
Um, in this phase, you start to see things like leadership emergence, which is,
Mm-hmm.
typically we have a hierarchical structure where there's a leader at the top, and people, even if they're good, they go back to the leader to find out what to do next.
Mm-hmm.
This gets more dispersed. You can think of it like kind of like a heat map with heat
Mm-hmm.
spots on there, but you'll have informal leaders somewhere in the unit that are maybe younger, that aren't in formal leadership positions but know what to do, and they're influential enough that there's people that will follow them even though they're not in direct leadership positions. And then the last one is purpose, and this one's really hard to get to, but this is where you have a really flat organization. People are
Mm-hmm.
just going to do what they know is supposed to be done to make the team work the best, to get the
Yeah.
product or the output that the team needs. It doesn't require a lot of formal leadership because everybody just knows what to do. The leader's got to
Mm-hmm.
look up and out and just make sure that the team is going in the right direction, and maybe nudge it one way or the other, um, when required. So that's kind of
Right.
the what have I learned? Yeah, that's kind of it. So I didn't hit, but when you're in that practice phase, you want to get to a point where the output on that one is confidence. So you
Right.
train a lot. You're really good at your job. You know your team is great. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Now you're confident in your teammates and you're confident in yourself. And then what this all adds up to from a military perspective, but I think it applies anywhere, is that because you're really cohesive with your team and your team is really good, and you don't want to be the person that derails your team.
Yeah.
So it equals discipline. Like, I'm going to make sure my behavior on and off duty is appropriate so that I don't derail my team. I don't, if I'm missing, the mission will suffer, or any other number of circumstances.
Yeah. I think having that more, what would I call it? More of just like a, I want to say like a not village, but like more like just a like a squad mindset of like what my actions are will directly impact or indirectly impact us as a whole. And no matter where I stand in the hierarchy, I what I do will impact the other guys. And I think that that breeds a sense of responsibility and helps with discipline, because you know that you don't just represent yourself, you represent a team, you represent a higher purpose. And you, from the leader on down to the lowest ranked member, you all have the same goals, and your role matters. It's not just, I got to do what I got to get done, and just to save face, I have to do what I have to get done, because if I don't, it will collapse.
Yeah, 100% right. And that is a lot harder than it sounds to take a bunch of people and get them to care about the team more than they care about their own self interest. I'm not saying
Yeah,
nobody's going to have their own self interest, but to consider how, like, if I go out and I'm drinking and I just plan on maybe I'll drive home. This man, if something bad happens and it reflects poorly on the team or it takes me off the team, I care so much about my team. I don't want that to happen. This is,
yeah,
I'm not saying I executed this perfectly, so it's still hard. It takes a
yeah,
really special team. And like I said, if you want to get there, you have to start all the way back at people. And, are you building that trust? Are you making them feel like they matter? Yeah, it's hard. But if done correctly, it works.
yeah. I think that's a very formidable system to utilize, because all four parts are important and they all play off of each other. And it also is, like you said, applicable to any avenue in life, whether that be your job, your personal relationship, your family. Building that trust on an individual level, and then dispersing that to the team, and then doing the work that needs to be done, because everybody is going to be counting on you, and you're going to be counting on them as well. And then that final step of purpose to do it for everybody, not just your own self-interest, and understand that you're all going in the same direction. So you are directly responsible for everybody, and they are directly responsible for you as well, which circles right back to the trust aspect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I
fascinating.
always wonder like how that works in corporate settings, big
Hmm.
companies, like the onboarding process.
Yeah.
Because I can, I've been in new units, I've been the new guy frequently, and it's always this sort of awkward process because you don't know anybody, and
Yeah.
psychologically, what you're kind of doing is you're looking for indicators of safety,
Hmm.
because your brain just kind of interprets it as a threat environment. Just because that's how our brains are primitive, and that's kind of how they're wired. So you're looking for indicators of safety. So I always think about, if it was me and I had a corporate sort of onboarding, what are the things I would do to make sure that people's uh, initial experience with the company is not one of heightened stress. There's gonna be a little bit of stress,
Yeah.
but it's not one of heightened stress. Because I think there's some things you could do in the first couple days that would attenuate that stress a lot, and then it becomes a
Mhm.
positive experience. You're like, oh, I'm glad I got hired here.
Yeah.
That's something I think about all the time.
Yeah. Finding that balance of stress, but also not overwhelming, is very important, because people, us as human beings, we do like challenges. We do like,
Oh, for
um,
sure.
we do like accomplishing difficult things, because it gives us that sense of purpose. It gives us that feeling of, I matter and I'm contributing. But at the same time, you don't want to, bombard somebody with um, too much responsibility and stress too early on, because they'll kind of build that negative connotation in their mind. So that also is what a good leader would instill, is that you matter, even though you're new. You do have a purpose, and you can contribute.
Yeah, and understanding. So stress tolerance goes back to kind of the personality
Yeah.
aspects. Like if you're an extrovert, and I say, hey, your job is to sit in this room by yourself for 12 hours a day, that's going to induce some stress. It works backwards. If I'm an introvert and your job is to go talk to all these people you don't know, man,
Yeah.
that's a stressful job. So you can't push people too far out of what they're wired for. It
Right.
applies to things like, you could use it for IQ, you could use it for your skill level. Like it's gotta just be like one standard deviation out of what you know, to be
Yeah.
the right amount of stress. And then you can't stay there too long. So it's a tricky pushing people out of their comfort zone. There's a couple articles I wrote on Medium about that, but that's a really interesting topic too. You can completely crash somebody and make them hate something by putting
Yeah.
them in the opposite of what they're built for. Even though
Yeah.
like they have the skills. Like if I'm a
Mhm.
introvert, I know how to talk to people. If you let me write it all down, I could do it. But putting me
Yeah.
in the situation, man, that's so stressful. It just ruin their the way they see the company. So that goes back. If you're onboarding people, do you want to know what their personalities are, or
Mhm.
do you have this set thing that works for everybody? Because if you hired introverts, and part of it is doing these socials to get to know everybody, which sounds like a good idea,
Right.
that's stressful. Like you're not hitting the mark.
Yeah. How do people gauge whether somebody's, kind of wired to do something and, you're just naturally an introvert or naturally an extrovert versus somebody who is just kind of, stuck in their ways and doesn't want to grow or expand into a bigger role or a new avenue? Like, how do you differentiate, like, you're making excuses versus this is how this person is?
I would say the first step is just ask them.
Yeah.
Is this something you're uncomfortable with because you don't want to do it, or and if the team is solid, if the communications is open, that should be something. Boss, I appreciate you asking me to do this. It's not something I really want to do, and that's
Mhm.
a few different ways that could go, but that would be my first step. Um, that's why I think it's important to understand personality styles. And
Yeah.
when I would interact with folks that work for me, I would have the big five personality model in my head, I'm always sort of categorizing them because I would give projects to certain people and, low impact projects that really weren't necessarily going anywhere. I just want to see, how do they work with this? And some people can
Mhm.
take a very ambiguous guidance and turn it into something interesting. And some people sort of get stifled because you didn't give them enough direction,
Right.
which is, neither one is good or bad. It's just like it sort of helps you understand how to deal with those people and how to get the
Yeah.
projects. But if it's someone that's just kind of not interested in the projects, that usually shines through in other personality characteristics. It's not just going to be that one, because you can, like, the way they respond to it, you can kind of tell, like, if they're interested in it but they just don't know what to do. That sounds different
Yeah.
than I'm not interested. Like, I know what to do, I'm just not interested. They kind of
Right.
the excuses or the reasons will sound different.
Yeah. Entirely, completely. In your time in the military, I'm sure you've done a breadth of traveling. What are some of the most interesting places you've gotten an opportunity to visit?
Before I came here to Germany, I was in the Baltics. The
Nice.
Baltics was I traveled a lot up and down Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to a
Mm,
few different places. That was really interesting. I like the Baltics. I was there for winter. The winters are
yeah.
nasty, very
Yeah.
high in latitude. So man, it was cold and icy. Got to spend some time in Poland. I like Poland. I like Germany. I was when I was in Afghanistan. It was Afghanistan's a relatively poor country.
Mhm.
Um, but I was in the poor part of Afghanistan, so it was. You learn a lot
Yeah.
about people and like what's important in life, and you take things away from everywhere you go.
Mhm.
But it's a beautiful country, Afghanistan. But and the people that most of the people that I worked with were very nice. Did some time in Kuwait.
Okay.
Kuwait is just hot,
Yeah.
and sandy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Iraq. I don't know. You take a little bit away from each one of them. I think it's really good to have that experience. Um,
Mhm.
Regardless of what you do, if you're interacting with people and you know making friends, it impacts your personality. Or if just going over there with your team and having to solve problems in a new environment where the rules kind of change, and it's a new environment, and you don't have the lifelines you do back in the U.S. Sometimes you're
Yeah.
isolated. You just have to figure things out. So those are the opportunities that I really push for junior officers and junior leaders in the Army to try to try to get on those things. But because regardless of what you're doing, it's always a fresh set of problems. It's always something interesting,
Mhm.
and it makes you think more and it makes you grow as a leader.
Yeah, learning about different cultures and seeing how different people live gives you a lot of underlying messages about what's important in life and um, what generally the purpose of life is and the ups and downs of it and how to navigate it. It gives you such a wide perspective. Um, when you like looking back on all your experiences in the military, I know the military is about hard work, discipline, and attention to detail and leadership. Um, but when you look back, what are some of the funnest times that you think back on your time in the military?
Yeah. Um, it's probably going to run a breadth of different sort of experiences. Like I've had
Mhm.
some fun times here in the U.S. with just with my teams, getting together with teams, and whether it's having social events or something like that, just being really, around people you really care about, doing something fun. So we do like military balls, like those are fun. There's things like, I mean, you'd be surprised, like staying up for almost 3 days with hardly any sleep and sitting in a military truck in the middle of Afghanistan, waiting for
Yeah,
something to happen, and just you're drinking caffeine and like making jokes, and like you'd be surprised like how much that sticks in your memory as something fun. Just little
right.
things like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of men in my generation coming up in their early 20s that are considering going to the military need to hear more stories of just about the fun times you can have as an officer and the wealth of experience and life knowledge you'll gain. It's so much more of a deeper pursuit than just following orders and being attentive and being disciplined. It's such a more deeper, even spiritual experience.
Yeah, yeah. There's one popped into my head. So when I was very young, this was probably two, 2001, 2002, when I was a
Hmm.
lieutenant. I was in the 82nd Airborne, and you go through this long process of putting on your parachutes and doing pre-flight checks, and it takes like 12 hours. And
Hmm.
so you're going on a training exercise, you're on the airplane. It was me and I had two other buddies that I was real close with that we hung out together, and then when we went to the field, we would kind of go to our own companies, but we'd always meet back up somewhere because the companies were close together. One of those guys ended up throwing up on the airplane, which is a no-no because we're packed in there like sardines. So he had to throw
Yeah.
up in his shirt.
Wow.
Um, so we jump out. It's the middle of the night. Do a long walk to a kind of a simulated village that we were going to attack. Getting lost in the middle of the it's the middle of the night in North Carolina. Getting lost, and all kinds of stuff happens on the way. It takes like 8 hours to go 5 kilometers because the
Wow.
terrain is bad. And we get there and we attack the city, and we're falling upstairs and getting beat up and getting bruised, and it's hard work. And then when it was all finished, we kind of just happened to meet up, and and we just laughed. Like it was the funniest. Like as
Yeah.
hard as that was, I mean, there's some of the relief that we're glad it's over, but like just laughing about all the crazy stuff that happened to us. It was a really it's a interesting and memorable event. But it's just that's one of those things. Like if you told me I had to do that, I wouldn't think it was funny. But
Right.
after I did all that stuff and I'm done, like man, that was hilarious.
Right. Yeah, that's challenging things often breed a lot of gratification when you're done,
For sure.
especially the things we're most fearful of doing. Once we actually get in there, you find out at the end, you're like, wow, that wasn't as hard as I thought. Or you think like that was actually fun because it was challenging. I pushed myself to a limit I didn't know I could reach. And I think that kind of is the epitome of the armed forces is tackling very difficult things and learning from them and learning that you can strive higher than what you thought you could accomplish.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's I don't know that I had that personality prior to the military, but
Hmm.
after being pushed to do some hard things that I may not have chosen to do, but I was kind of pushed.
Yeah.
And then like I said, you get there and you're, well, if that guy can do it, I can do it. It's hard, but I'll suck it up and I'll get through it. It definitely changes your personality. It's one of those things you need to start doing early, because the
Hmm.
sooner you come to the realization that, yeah, just because it looks hard doesn't mean I can't do it. And if there's
Right.
something on the other side that I really want, it's worth it.
I want to know your opinion on the current state of affairs we're um, in terms of not just the conflicts we have like externally with other countries, just the state of affairs we're in internally, in terms of young men joining the military. Um, it's definitely not at its peak, and I think a lot of people are having more trepidations in entering. Can you kind of give a positive message to young men that are either on the brink of considering it or may not ever have considered it, but it could be how fruitful of an opportunity it can be?
The military is fairly stable, regardless of the volatility of a current climate. The military stays pretty stable. It doesn't necessarily look that way from the outside, but at the end of the
Hmm.
day, it's still young leaders with teams of folks who care about making a difference.
Hmm.
And that's really hard to change. It'd be hard to change millions of people. Like I
Yeah,
said, at the top, what you hear, it may look different, but at the end of the day, that's what the military is. And if
yeah,
you know, if you want to be someone who is put in a position where you have to be a good leader, but people are going to want you to be a good leader, and they're going to invest time in you to develop your leadership skills and let you practice that. Then the military is the right answer. Like I said, I didn't think I'd ever join the military, but something called me, and it was the best decision I ever made. Um, you're constantly
yeah,
being pushed. You're constantly being asked, either do you want to do this thing? It's really hard, but at the end, it's something good. Or we all have to do this hard thing. We're all doing it. I need your help. I need you to get your team through this difficult challenge, whatever training exercise, whatever it may be. So at the end of the day, the military is not going to change too much, regardless of what you hear in the military. It is
yeah.
still young leaders who really want to do their job with young folks who care about making a difference.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Because a lot of us don't have that, internal perspective. A lot of us are kind of on the outside looking in and don't really know what our current state of affairs are in terms of the military. We kind of just hear it through media, and we might have a friend or a cousin that's in the military, but we don't really have an eye on just the state of it and like just the day to day of what an officer really does. A lot of us are kind of like we get those insights through movies and things like that. So it's good to hear that we're at a stable place, and that not only are we stable, that there's young leadership and there's still a very high interest in uh, pursuing the armed forces. That's good to hear.
Yeah, even to the extent that when you're at work, you don't really even notice all that other stuff, all the volatility and the politics. Like, that doesn't
Hmm.
translate down into what we do. We still do the same thing we've always done. We're still trying to train and get really good at what we do and try to be ready to
Yeah,
protect the nation's interests. So
yeah. That's that's what I hope everyone takes away is that you know the military. You can have any opinion about it, but hearing from the voices that are actually in the military and hearing the stories and the good times and the positive experiences people take away from it and how it could be applied in so many different avenues is really the story I want people to take away. It's just it's I want to push more of a positive connotation when you think about the military. I think it should be something people take pride in. I think it should be something people, even if you're not in the military, it should be something you are prideful about, something you are happy we have, because there's a lot of places on earth where they don't have a whole team of people trying to keep you safe every single day. And I think we should be more grateful that we have it.
yeah, no, that's a great point. I would say that I feel so lucky to get to do the thing I'm passionate about, and it's grown over. I've been in the Army almost 3 decades,
Yeah.
and my passion for what I do just gets more and more. Every year I'm in the Army, and the longer you're in, and the kind of higher you go up in the military, the more it becomes obvious how lucky you are to be able to work with a bunch of people who join, volunteer to join, and want to do the thing to keep the nation's interest intact. It's just a really inspiring job.
What new pursuits have you gotten into? Like, what are you currently up to, and how can people keep track of what you're currently doing?
Yeah, so my website is summaryleadership.com. So I've been in the military for 28 years. I'm going to retire at about 30, 31. Um, so what I'm trying to do is kind of, since I, made it clear, I love leadership. I love teaching leaders how to be leaders. I love team building. Um, Trying to build up into a consulting business to where I can do the thing that I love with people who want to learn about it. When
Yeah.
you're in the military for 30 years, you got to think real hard. Like when you retire, dude, because retirement pays fine. I don't need to work. So
Mhm.
my logic was I kind of want to work, and I really still love doing this. So if I'm going to work, it's going to be doing this thing that I really love. And
Right.
frankly, if I can't make it work, then fine. Um, but I'm certainly not gonna pick something that's outside of where I want to be. So
Hmm.
that's what I'm looking for. I want to help leaders. What I really want to try to focus on is young leaders. Um, Particularly probably Gen Z. I think
Yeah.
they're in a really unique situation as far as where they fall in the timeline of we've got technology now, and they're unique in that they don't necessarily have the same viewpoint as the previous three generations. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of opportunities there uh, to help build new, like, creative leaders like we just haven't seen before, solving problems like we haven't seen before. And I
Yeah.
really want to help those guys understand it from a psychological point of view. There's
Hmm.
definitely, if you talk complexity theory, there's so much in there that you can relate to complexity theory, and even things like, I talked about technology, but I'm doing a lot of research into evolutionary leadership theory. Just the most basic, the most primal aspects of being a human
Yeah.
still applies no matter how much technology you have. You're still a human being. You still have to account for what neurotransmitters and what hormones are doing to your brain while you're doing that. So that's kind of where I'm
Yeah.
at now. What I'd really like is between now and when I retire to start taking on a few clients here and there and just do leadership coaching, just because I love it.
Yeah. I'm grateful that we have people like you, and very, uh, I'm very grateful that you gave me the time to have you on my platform. I believe uh, Gen Z and even young millennials, we are in a leadership deficit in terms of people we look to uh, give us a model and to lead by example. And I'm glad that there are people in the generations prior to us that are spending their time to pass down the things they've learned and to give us kind of a roadmap and different things to look at when in terms of leading, and then not only leading in new ways, like you said, finding new solutions, finding new ways to go about leading, because this generation is unique. It didn't have to go through certain things that the previous generations had to go through, so they kind of look at things a little differently. And I think that what you're doing is very noble and also very helpful, and will probably breed a new generation of leaders that will lead us in the right direction.
Well, thank you for saying that. Like I said, it's a passion, so it's something I would just naturally do. But I really want to make sure that I'm out there for folks who want to reach out.
Yeah.
That I'm here.
Thank you. This is Damon Wells. He's been a great guest, very comprehensive, very informative. I want to thank you again for your time, and I hope everyone listens and reaches out to you. And um, I wish you the best of luck in all your endeavors. And um, you've been a fantastic guest. Thank you for coming.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, man. Have a good year as well.
Have a good one.
I'm talking about genuine peace kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living.
Bottom line, there were no weapons of mass destruction.
Totally unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. Of Ukraine.
A new world order. A new world order can emerge. A new era.
No, don't clap, man, because I got more hands.
And Hillary are demons. Feeling peace in our time.
Most people just don't want to run for vote.
Peace in all time.